When was the last time you studied a book of the Bible in its entirety from start to finish? Or when was the last time you led your small group in a study of a book of the Bible from start to finish? I have to confess, I have been guilty from time to time of studying, listening, and reading the words of men more than I have the words of the Bible. Now, the words of men and women, man, they can be used to help us understand the Bible better. They can show us things that we may not have seen the first time we read it. And God can use men and women to open up our hearts and our minds to awesome truth that God has for us. But with that said, God's words at the end of the day are the only words that are authoritative. The only words that have the power to transform us. So as a small group leader, we are about transformation. We are about our group members and ourselves becoming fully devoted followers of Jesus. So if we are about making disciples, making men and women who are followers of Jesus, we must be about the words that transform us into that follower of Jesus. As a small group leader, we often think that community is our number one priority. We often think that building a tight-knit group of people is the number one thing we're doing. Though community is a big part of small groups, it is not our number one priority. The number one priority is that we create fully devoted followers of Jesus. That God uses us to point men and women to His Word to make fully devoted followers of Jesus. So what does it look like to prepare to facilitate a Bible study through an entire book of the Bible? Well, first, you have to know the who, what, when, where, and why of a book. For instance, in the book of Colossians, you have to know who wrote it. Who was the author writing to? Why was he writing to that group of people? Once you then know the who, what, when, where, and why, once you know the context, I would then go through and I would take a week and I would just read that book through and through as many times as you can. Just take a week and read it over and over and over again. Once you've done that, I then break down, and I would break it down in main ideas. Kind of look at what verses flow together to make complete thoughts. It's awesome. In some of the tools that we listed, it'll actually help you do that. It'll break it down for you. Then I go through and I study it verse by verse. I walk through and I study each line, each idea together. So what does it look like to study it verse by verse? Well, the first thing we have to know as we study verse by verse is that the rest of the Bible is the only authoritative opinion about that verse. So in other words, what does the Bible say about the Bible? You'll want to turn to other places in the Bible that talk about those verses, or that maybe have some of the same words. So you'll read those, put those ideas together. Next, what are some key words? What do some of the key words of that verse mean? There's an awesome website called blueletterbible.org. If you go to blueletterbible.org and you type in your verse or your verses in the top upper right-hand corner, they will then pop up, and they'll pop up verse by verse. If you then click on the button that says Tools, on a particular verse, it'll then pop up each verse word by word. And then right in the middle, under the column Strongs, if you click on one of the hyperlinks, it'll then take one particular word and give you the definition. So really what this website does is it breaks it down verse by verse, word by word, and then can give you the definition of that word. Because when you have the definition of a word, you will then see the true meaning of what that verse means. The last thing I would do in studying verse by verse is read commentaries. What commentaries are is it literally is one man or numerous men's opinion on that verse. Now, like we said, we're here to study the Bible. We're here to study the words of God and not other men. See, in studying verse by verse, sometimes we're so quick to go to the commentary and just read what one man says and think that's what it means. So I would encourage you to read multiple commentaries. Get many different views as you form your opinion, as you form your view, as God uses you. So once you've studied verse by verse, and once you have an idea of the verse and kind of got a good grip of those verses, then you want to prepare to lead your lesson through facilitating. Because we don't want you as a small group leader to just stand up behind a podium like I'm doing now. We want you to engage and to have everyone in your group engage in what you've learned. Now, this actually takes a little bit more preparation because to teach it and to stand behind a podium, you really just have to study it and regurgitate it. But to lead through facilitating, you have to know your verses. You have to know what the writer's saying very thoroughly, so then you can form questions to teach what you have already learned. So how I would lead through the facilitating of Colossians chapter 1, verse 15. He is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. You see, verse 15 paints a beautiful picture. The Greek word for image also translates icon, which means copy or likeness. So if we want to get a better understanding of who God is, we must study Christ. So let me ask you the question. What attributes of Jesus do we see through the Gospels? Hopefully some people in your group would say compassion, love, mercy. We see Jesus caring for others. So we would have some great discussion and some great dialogue around the attributes of who Jesus is. And we would put those directly to who God is. And so we would spend some time talking about that. So notice I took a few minutes to teach on a word, but then I drew out the rest of my notes through questions. I would then ask the question, in a royal family, what does it mean to be the firstborn? Somebody would answer, to be firstborn means that you are next in line to the throne, that you are going to be the coming king or queen of the land. We saw that in the Old Testament also. If you were the firstborn, you were next to be king. We also see that in modern day monarchies. So I would ask, who is the firstborn? What does that mean? Someone say the coming king. So then we read that Jesus is the firstborn, the coming king over all creation. And we would bring some depth to that verse and talk about it and teach it that way through questions. You see, I have all those notes written down here for what that verse means. But instead, I want to draw in my crowd. I want to draw in my small group participants and let them answer questions and have dialogue and lead to my notes. But be careful, because as you study and as you prepare and lead through an entire book of the Bible, it is real easy to leave out what does God want us to feel and what does God want us to do. It's easy to focus on the know part. It's easy to focus on the knowledge part of the verses and miss over the transforming part altogether. See, when I read Colossians chapter 1, verse 15, and I read that God is firstborn over all creation, man, it brings me the sense of awe. It brings me the sense that God is almighty, that God is merciful, that God has power over his people. Because I see that. I see that Jesus had power over the people that he walked on the earth with. And then I read that Jesus is the coming king, that he is the coming Messiah, that he came in the New Testament as the Messiah, but yet that he's also going to return one day as the coming king. That brings me excitement. That brings me joy, and that gives me hope. As I think about how that makes me feel, I'm then reminded of the do. What does God want us to do with that verse? What does God want us to do? Well, ultimately, he wants us to do exactly what you're going to do as a small group leader and what we're called to do as small group leaders. And that is to teach and to preach and to share the hope that comes in that verse, that we serve a king who is Lord over all creation. So small group leaders, I want to encourage you, as you lead your small groups, I want to encourage you to be about the Bible, to teach more of the Bible, to dig into God's word, to chew on it, to wrestle with it, to lead your small group in discussion about the Bible. We are blessed to be in a day and age where we can get phenomenal sermons, phenomenal Bible studies at the tip of our fingers, on our smartphone, on our iPads, on our computers. And that's awesome. That is so great. But small group leaders, may we be careful that we don't study more of the words and the opinions of men than we do the words of God. Because it is God's word alone that transforms us, that brings us to being fully alive, that brings us to a place of being a fully devoted follower of Jesus. Small group leaders, thank you for all that you do. We love you, and as always, we're praying for you.